Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Golf Talk Live. I'm your host, Ted Odorico, and we've got a great show for you tonight, this June 16th on the cusp of the U.S. Open. Very excited about that. We'll talk a little bit about that here in just a minute when the guys come on. We're going to start things off, as always, with a great round of Coaches Corner on the panel. And I got two great guys, two veterans of the game, really been on the show many, many times, and, of course, veterans of golf as well. Mr. John Hughes and Pete Buchanan. I'll bring them out here in just a second. And then a little bit later on in the show, on the second half of the show, after the Coach's Corner, a gentleman actually that was on his first panel discussion earlier this year, Mr. Paul Kaster. He's a golf coach and the Forsgate Country Clubs Director of Instruction. He's going to be joining me in the second half of the show, and we're going to talk a little bit about taking your game onto the golf course from the practice tee and some other good stuff as well we're going to have in there. But we've got a great discussion on the panel tonight, and we're going to talk about a lot of different things. And I'll get to that, as I said, just in a second here. But let me just remind everybody, of course, every Thursday night from 6 to 8 p.m. Central Time, or 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time for those of you on the East Coast, and 4 to 6 for those of you Pacific Time, is where you can find us. Go to blogtalkradio.com. Up in the search key, type Golf Talk Live, and that will take you to the main page. And, of course, on the live broadcast, it'll always be at the top. For some reason, if you can't join us during the live broadcast, not to worry. All of the shows, of course, are auto-recorded as they are broadcasted, and you can always go to the link, blogtalkradio.com/Golf Talk Live, and just scroll down to the on-demand section, and it'll always be the most recent show. Again, will be at the top, and you can just scroll down and listen to some of the previously aired shows when it's convenient for you if you can't join us here live. But for those of you that are tuning in tonight live, thank you very much as always. Good to have you here on board. If you want to call in, we always encourage you guys to call in. I know some of you are a little shy out there, but the number to call, of course, is area code 646-716-4667. We're here to take your questions and calls, and we would love to help you maybe fine-tune or fix your game if you're having some issues right now. So, again, we encourage you to call into the show if you so desire. And, again, that number is 646-716-4667. Also, you can email me any questions or comments about the show to ted.golftalklive@gmail.com. And if you're somebody in the golf business, whether you're an instructor or coach, an entrepreneur, or maybe somebody that's written a golf book, anybody in the golf industry really, or that wants to reach out to me and come on the program, you can also reach out to me at my email address, ted.golftalklive@gmail.com. Always update the programs, of course, on social media, Facebook and Twitter particularly, but also on LinkedIn. My page is facebook.com/Golf Talk Live blog. Make sure you have blog in the end there. And my Twitter handle, of course, is Ted and Buck, CEO, CEO being in capital letters. And thank you for all of the recent followers and likes on both social media forums. As I mentioned, I got two great guys coming on the show here, so I'm going to bring them out. John Hughes, first up. He's a PGA Master Professional, also the Vice President of the North Florida PGA Section, and he was the recipient of the 2013 PGA of America Horton Smith Award. And he's recognized as one of the top 30 instructors here in the U.S. by Golf Tips magazine. Also following with him is Pete Buchanan. He's the founder and director of instruction and owner of Plain Simple Golf, LLC. And Plain Simple Golf, of course, houses the Plain Simple Golf Circuit and the Simple Swing Repeater Training Brace, which are some great products, and definitely want you to check that out after the show. He's taught for over 30 years, and Pete's agenda really is to simplify his golf swing philosophy in an effort to help make it simple for you guys out there to play your best. So, gentlemen, again, welcome back to the Coach's Corner panel.
Hi, Ted. Thanks, Ted. It's good to be here.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, guys, as always. And I mean, you guys have been on here so many times now. I think I've lost count. But always, as I said, let me just first say thank you very much for doing that. I know it's not always easy. Schedules sometimes get conflicted, and it's not always easy to be able to schedule the time. But I'm glad that you guys are and have done so many times in the past and continue to do so in the future. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing that, guys. I appreciate it. All right, we're going to talk about here tonight. I decided I wanted to talk about really three levels or categories, if you will, of students. We're going to talk about each independently, of course, the not advanced or beginning students, intermediate students, and the advanced students. Now, there's actually really four categories. We're going to sort of graze across, if you will, the experts or what we'd classify as the professionals. So there's really four categories. There's the beginning students out there, the intermediate students, and advanced, and then of course there's the professionals, which you're going to be watching this weekend at the U.S. Open. First and foremost, guys, any thoughts about the U.S. Open before we get into our discussion? John, I'll let you go first.
Well, it looks like it's Florida up there, at least Florida weather. With the afternoon showers, they'll definitely change the greens and how they play, but it's still early. The tournament can be lost today. In the next couple of days, we'll see how it shakes out. But Oakmont always tends to bring forth the absolute best golfer who's not necessarily hot, but the person who can navigate the best with the entire bag, not necessarily just a few clubs.
Right. Pete, what about you? Is there anybody, obviously it's a little early for predictions right now, but are you looking or would you like to see maybe a more seasoned veteran? Like, everybody's talking about Phil Mickelson. Would you like to see him holding up the cup on Sunday, or, maybe one of the young guns? What's your thoughts there?
Well, we were having a discussion today, and my pick would be Dustin Johnson. I'd love to see him come forward and last year watching him down the stretch, and then he just couldn't get it done. But I'd like to see him play very well here and come up. And he's such a smooth player. It's fun to watch him. He hits it so far. But as John was saying, Oakmont, you just never know. I mean, that golf course, you can hit a perfect shot and end up where you never wanted to be. So it's going to be a test of I think those that mentally can just push themselves around the golf course without, as John said previously too, losing it today or tomorrow. That's really the key.
Yeah, and you hit it right on the head there too, Pete, is that, mentally, this is going to be a mental test, I think. I mean, all of these guys, we know their physical abilities are certainly not really going to come into question. There might be the odd miss hit here and there, but for the most part, it's going to come up to who's mentally tough and emotionally tough throughout the next few days. I think is going to be the ultimate winner. And certainly there's going to be a little luck involved in there, some putts that maybe you wouldn't think are going to go in are suddenly going to drop in there and maybe position somebody in a good spot coming in Sunday. So we'll have to wait and see, and we'll see what happens. But let's get back to the discussion here. I want to start with beginning golfers, and those, of course, are the students that fall into this category of, as I said, not advanced or beginner golfers. They tend to be very wildly inconsistent, and tend to be players that shoot double bogey golf or worse, sort of fall into this category. So I want to ask, and John, I'll go back to you here real quick. Obviously, we're going to teach each of these levels differently. There's some components that might be similar, and I want you just let me preface this for both of you here. I don't want to jump ahead and sort of cover all three at once. So let's stick with the beginner. John, if you have a student that's come in and you've sort of vetted them out and they've indicated that they're a beginning student and you've had some discussions with them and that, what are some things that you're going to be looking at, and how are you going to handle this person compared to maybe what you might do with somebody else?
A question I ask all golfers, regardless of skill, is why they play, which a lot of instructors don't ask. And that the answer to that is going to predicate where I'm probably going to go with them, along with just trying to assess their overall athleticism. Someone who's fairly athletic, you can sort of get them into feeling what good impact is. Others who are not so athletic, it's literally just trying to have them maximize their athleticism by understanding better balanced movement. This time of year in Florida, like, we get a lot of beginners to come out of the woodwork and want to try golf and see where it goes. And if they're not having fun, and if I'm not understanding what their fun level is related to why they play, am I playing because the spouse plays, or my son or daughter plays, or I need to learn this for corporate reasons, whatever the case may be, you have to take that into consideration as well as their time commitment to it. The bottom line to me is, and I've said this before, and I'll repeat it until I'm dead, that it's all about having fun. And that does relate to how they're going to take to the game. Definitely not oversaturating somebody, just keeping it fairly simple, keeping it fairly easy. And if they can accomplish something, that's really the key, is can they accomplish something that gets that adrenaline flowing, that sort of inspires them and motivates them to come back. That's really the key. And that it's different for everybody. Some people need that athletic movement and some people don't. And that's where I tend to evaluate first and go from there based on what their goals and their aspirations are.
Right. Exactly. Well said. Pete, one of the things that I try to do with beginning golfers, and I think it's important, and John, I know that you would cover this as well. Most of the beginning golfers, I think it's critical to build good fundamentals. I think it's important to make sure that they start off with the proper setup, proper grip, and a good solid base to work with, alignment, things like that. And also, I think it's important to develop a good pre-shot routine. Most beginning golfers don't even really understand what a pre-shot routine is, and I think it's important to help them develop one and incorporate one right from the get-go. I think one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of people make, and not just in teaching but in golfers taking up the game, is they don't get into a good habit or good pre-routine, if you will, and also the post-routine is important. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. But Pete, fundamentals and developing a pre-shot routine, critical for the beginning golfer?
Well, no question. One of the first things I always like to ask them is, what is golf to you? You're here, so what do you want to get out of it? And, the basic fundamentals are important. I know we're talking about beginners, but for every player. But it's important because they have such an advantage as a beginner because they don't have any previous knowledge to react from. And so you can really get in and get them set in a good address, get them to, set up with the parameters that are necessary. But, one of the things I want to make clear from the start is I always ask them, what are we trying to do? So if we're putting, if we're chipping, if we're pitching, if we're bunker shots, or just the regular full swing, I always ask them, what are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? So they can understand, what do we want the ball to do? So in order to make the ball behave in a certain way, the club and the ball have to have a reaction. And here's what that has to look like. And then from there, you have to do these things to make that reaction happen. And so that way they get it so they can understand what's supposed to happen, why they're supposed to do the things to make that happen, and then how to set up to achieve it. We all know that most of the amateurs that play the game miss hit shots before they ever hit them because they put themselves in a dress where they can't get it done. And so they've not learned the reaction to, here's what I'm trying to do, here are the things that are going to control that, here's how I can control the club. So based on that, if you can get them to understand that process from the beginning, they're so far ahead of the game because they can always see what the ball does, lead that back to the relationship between the club and the ball, and then how to go about fixing it on their own. So I try to get them into that framework right away so that they understand that every time they're going to hit a shot, you have to ask yourself, what are we trying to do here? And I spent time with the Jacobs schools. John Jacobs said that every time when I got to work with him and got to watch him teach. Every single class we went to, he says, what are we trying to do? First and foremost, what do we want the ball to do? So I think if they can get that fundamental understanding at the beginning, it makes it a little bit easier for them to see how and why they need to set up the way they do.
Yeah, well said, both of you, by the way. The other thing, John, that I want to talk about as well is obviously, in today's game, years ago, instruction primarily, we kept them on the practice tee and got them working on different, their fundamentals and other shots and things like that to get them to understand golf. But now most of the instructors are trying to get them out on the course. For a beginning golfer only, I'm talking about the beginners right now. We'll talk about the others in a second. For beginning golfers, how much time, and we'll use just as a platform, let's say an hour-long lesson, how much time for a beginning golfer should be dedicated on the range or in the practice facility, and how much on course, if at all, in the early stages of development?
I tend to get the confidence level of the student in front of me to find out if they're confident enough to get out on the golf course with the skills they currently have. A lot of times they've already been on the course, and that's why they're there to see us. It didn't go well. It just was so disastrous. They felt the need to start fresh and start anew, as Pete said. So it's really based, again, on the individual. A lot of the beginning lessons are probably more done on the range than, say, on the golf course, simply because if you can't accomplish it on the range, how are you going to accomplish it on the golf course? The real key is, can you advance the golf ball in some way, some form, some fashion? Are you advancing that golf ball in a functional way? Doesn't have to be pretty, doesn't have to be the best looking pose at the end, but can you put the club on the ball, have that reactive element that Pete spoke about, and get it moving, propelled down the fairway and onto the green? And that's typically, again, based on the individual. I've got a couple of beginners. That's the only place they want to be is on the golf course, because they elude such confidence, they elude so much enthusiasm that they'd rather learn it on the golf course, and that's probably fewer and much more far between than the average beginner who's having issues with just let's get the club on the ball. And that typically is going to boil down not only to confidence but athleticism. People who are more athletic are going to be more prone to want to get out on the golf course. They're a bit hungry to be out there. And that's certainly something that we can accomplish. I've got some beginners now that they're nowhere close to being ready to be on a golf course. They've never, ever been on a golf course. So to bring them out there and allow them to fail is something a great coach won't allow to happen until it's time for it to happen. You do learn from failures, but you can literally have such disastrous failures in just one hole with a beginner that will never come back and play. And it's our responsibility as their coach to at least give them the opportunity to come back that second time, that third time, that fourth time. See, it's not that I'm guarded getting people on the golf course, so we want them out there. But some indoctrination sometimes a great example, especially the business person. I'll bring them out on the golf course and only have them chip and putt, but at the same time have them understand where to stand when they're putting and when somebody else is putting, and what a red hazard is or what a yellow hazard is, just simply so they can handle themselves in that kind of situation. So it really depends on the person and the situation too.
Yeah, and you raise an interesting point too, John. Is really, obviously it depends on the individual. Some individuals are a little bit more aggressive in their play and want to get out there. But again, we have to be careful that we're not taking somebody that's maybe not quite ready to step out in the golf course and let them have an experience that's not going to be or is going to be rather detrimental and more than likely get them to shy away from coming back again. And we certainly want them to continue to come back. Pete, that also, I guess, brings up another thing. I talked to one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this tonight is, I always try to find some different topics and things that we can have discussions on the panel, because I don't want to, fall into the pattern of sort of the same old questions of, how do you fix the slice? How do you, hit a draw, or how do you do this? There's just too much of that, and that's not really helping golfers out there. It might help a few throw a Band-Aid here. But so yesterday I had a very unique opportunity, and while I was preparing for tonight's show, I had 5 young gentlemen ranging from 10 years old up to the oldest was 19. Now, they were all cousins and all knew one another, and there were 5 of them, as I said, all boys, and various different levels. Most of them were beginning golfers. Some had played a few times. One was an intermediate golfer. We'll talk about him in a second. And one of the things I want to do is I wanted to ask them questions about what they wanted to know about the golf game, what they wanted to learn, what was troubling them, where they were having difficulties, and what they didn't understand. And it was kind of interesting, the different perspectives. Obviously, the youngest player, as I said, was 10 years old, and, he hadn't played very much, and he didn't really have a strong interest. He enjoyed going out once in a while with his dad. So, again, it goes to your point, John. You talk about really understanding and asking, why are you here? Are you just there to have fun, or is it just something you want to do with your dad or a partner once in a while? And so understanding and assessing that. Then they had the intermediate golfer who plays quite regularly, actually used to play competitively, had some different question concerns. I'm going to throw a few of those in here as well. But Pete, obviously, to further John's point, it really depends, I think, with your students on where they at, even though they're a beginning golfer, where their comfort level is and what their ability is before you want to start shuffling them out to the golf course, correct?
That is correct. One of the things that I've done is, we take the short game area and actually play holes that way to start them off. And so we play little par 3, 4s, and 5s from about 40 yards on in, just to get them used to playing the ball around the green. And, so many times when you look at players out on the golf course, you can get them to reasonably hit it as a beginning player. They hit a couple of shots within 40 yards of the green, and they make it 17. So because the short game is just not there. I want to get them fundamentally sound putting, chipping, and pitching first. Let them understand what the scoring shots are around the green, get them comfortable being around the greens, because in my experience with beginners, that's where they take the longest time. They get around the green, and, unless they're just picking them up. But, they just take forever. So I think you can get them comfortable with, how to play little holes around there. And then when we start on the golf course, we start at 100 yards. We just drive straight down the fairway till we're 100 yards out. We're going to tee off from here. Let's get you comfortable being out here, being around the greens, how you're supposed to move, where you walk, the things to look out for, and, those types of things. So I think that gives them a good fundamental start. So they're a little bit more comfortable with out there. And obviously with what John said, you have to deal with the personalities, because some may not be, ready even though you're doing those things. But I've always found when they're comfortable around the greens, they can just maneuver around the golf course so much easier.
Sure. Yeah, that's so true. What was interesting talking about, and I want to move on to the intermediate category now, and this, of course, we're talking about the golfer who has, some yet limited control over the golf ball. They can hit some decent shots, but yet lack consistency. They're not consistent players, and they tend to range, from bogey golf to double bogey. They're not quite, some pars might be in there once in a while, but they're still not consistent enough to really get in there and shoot some great scores. So John, I want to go back to you here. With the intermediate golfers, again, I can't emphasize enough, and I think you mentioned this, or it might have been Pete. I'm a firm believer in the fundamentals, and I take a quote from Jack Nicklaus in Golf My Way. Every season when he would get ready to start a new season on the PGA Tour, he always went through basically all of his fundamentals, again, from grip and so forth, stance and posture and alignment and all those components. He did that every year at the beginning of the season to make sure that he was doing everything correctly that was comfortable for his play. And he always emphasized the importance of that. And, of course, I'm just paraphrasing, but essentially that's what he was saying. For the intermediate golfer, certainly we want to revisit fundamentals here as well, but with the intermediate golfer, discussing or explaining ball flight laws and giving them, is that a good option here, helping them to understand how the ball is reacting to certain situations with the club control? Is this something that we don't want to necessarily start with the beginning golfer, but the intermediate golfer, is this something that we may want to have a discussion with them and help them understand why the ball is reacting the way it does?
I hate to go back to this, but it does depend on the person and at what stage they are in learning the game. Are they studying the swing? Are they studying movement? Or are they still just trying to get the ball around in as few strokes as possible? A lot of people who claim they're inconsistent, I'll let them know that they're consistently inconsistent. And what I mean by that is you define consistent as a score, but sometimes we have to take score out of it to have someone understand that they hit a shot a particular way 98% of the time, and that 2% anomaly may be something, at least what I've found, to be a compensation back to something that they ought to be doing. And with the advancement of technology, I think what we're all falling into, or at least finding out, and I've said this before on the show, is that alignment's probably the number one thing that an intermediate golfer fails to do, and it falls back on to that pre-shot routine. Are they actually lining something up to, can they see how that straight arrow is going to fly towards that target?
Right.
Most people neglect that. And because of that neglection, compensation sink into the swing. So it's a lot about still fundamentals, still getting set up correctly to set your machine up so when you turn it turns on fluidly and repeats. And that, to me, is more the definition of consistent. Can you set up the same way each and every time? I've got years of videos that show that once we get somebody aligned correctly, posture changes for the better, weight transfer changes for the better, club plane and club path change for the better, and it's all due to that misalignment. A lot of times when people are inconsistent, you'll hear them say they hit a great shot, but it goes right for the right-hander, yet they're trying to figure out why they have the slice. Well, they're predestined to do it based on how they've set up. So a lot of people who plateau, and I'll typically see the plateau somewhere between 14 and 17 handicap, it's literally a matter of them understanding, let's just clean some things up. You don't have to get ultra detailed or ultra precise here, just the bigger things that are going neglected that a Nicklaus did do. I've got firsthand knowledge of that through his, not Jack Grout, but Jack Grout's son Dick, who's a good friend of mine, a PGA professional in South Carolina. He witnessed what Nicklaus would do, and here's arguably the world's best golf player ever, who would meticulously work on four fundamentals: grip, alignment, stance, and posture. And rarely did Dick's father, Jack, give Mr. Nicklaus some type of lesson that concerned movement, because they knew back in the 40s and 50s, if you don't set your machine up correctly, how can the machine work correctly?
Yeah, exactly. Pete, also on I think for the intermediate golfer, now I'm going to mention a couple things that Michael, who was the young gentleman, he was 17. And by the way, these three of the five were from, they're all originally from Indiana, but three of the five still live up in Indiana, and the other two, one lived in Ohio, and the other one I think lived actually not too far from where I live, up in Chipley, Florida. But they're all cousins, and they were at sort of a family get-together, and they kind of saw me doing my thing there and piqued my curiosity. So I invited them to join me for a conversation, and I sort of asked them some questions about it. First I asked if any of them golfed, and naturally, and then we went from there. And Michael, who was the intermediate golfer, he's the one that played the most, played a little bit competitive golf, through school and so forth. One of the things I asked him, I said, what areas are you struggling with? What do you most want to sort of get from your golf game? And obviously, typical young male is he wanted to get more distance. He wanted to know how to hit, the ball further and things like that. And I asked him, generally what he scores, and he says he averages, in around 86 to 90 in that range, which is pretty much falling what I'm talking about here in intermediates. But I asked him about things like course management and how he handles himself, navigates around the course. So, Pete, obviously that's important for an intermediate golfer to improve. It's not just all about ball striking. I mean, certainly you want to get their consistency up, but it's about how you help them to navigate their way around the course for that particular type of golfer. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do agree with that. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I've done is I designed a scorecard that would have them track their scores in the sense of the shots that they hit. And so they track the number of tee shots, their second shots into the par fours and par fives, their third shots into the par fives, and I had a category called others if they missed the green, and then putts. And it would really give them an idea of, if you hit 14 tee shots, well, then you did what you were supposed to do because you only had 14 available. If you had 16 tee shots, it means you had a couple of them out of bounds, and you had to redo it. So it kind of gives them an idea of, where is their game really struggling for the scoring? You know, and a lot of times we'll find out that it's not necessarily the longer shots, it's the shorter ones. That's where they're wasting so many shots. You know, they make a 6 on a hole, they have a drive and a second shot, and they have 4 shots around the green. And so that's where they're trying to find that. And so, you know, another side of the coin with an intermediate player too is I always like to ask them too, you know, especially when you have a question about distance or a question about I'm trying to hit a particular shot, and I ask them, well, what do you think is necessary to hit that type of shot? What are you trying to do? And they'll explain to me what they're trying to do, and then I'll go back to them and say, do you realize that none of that will give you what you're trying to do?
Right.
Because for the most part, they're doing mostly the opposite of what they should be doing because they don't have the understanding of what's going to give them those types of shots. So it goes back to, as you said, fundamentals. Fundamentals are for, you know, everybody. And it goes back to, okay, if you want to get more distance, if you want to hit a ball that doesn't slice or hook, do you understand what's necessary to make that happen? And here's what's necessary, so here's what you have to do. So try to go back to a fundamental route, back to ball flight, back into, okay, there's the ball, there's the flight I want, here's the relationship the club has to give it, how do I achieve it? And so I think it really opens them up to a new view of what's going on, but it always works them, as I always like to say, back towards correct. What is correct? How do I get back towards correct? So they're always working towards correct instead of fighting an incorrect, which the vast majority of players that play the game do. They fight an incorrect. They never get anywhere because they're always fighting what's wrong instead of understanding what's correct and working towards it.
Right. What was really interesting about the conversation, and again, I wanted to take a perspective for somebody outside of the industry. I mean, you know, it's great that we have our discussions here every week on the Coach's Corner panel, but we're in the industry. We understand, you know, first off, we understand the lingo, we understand the technology that's out there. But for the average golfer, I wanted to get, and especially the younger golfers, there's a lot of misconceptions and a lot of misunderstandings, and I actually proved it yesterday in the conversation. To give you an example, one of the other young gentlemen, I don't remember all of their names, unfortunately, but a couple of them stuck out. But the other gentleman, young boy that was there in the group, was 13. And he initially started off, he wanted to understand. He didn't know how to set up, to make putts. He didn't know how to set up to use his putter and that. But one of the other questions that he asked me goes on to what you were just talking about, you know, making good contact and that, is he wanted to know about, again, how hitting the ball further, how much energy should he put into it? In other words, how hard should he swing? How fast should he swing? So he equated it with sort of brute strength, if you will, in making the ball go further. And that's a misconception that, as we all know, that a lot of people have. And it just goes to show, and it's no fault of instruction because most of these kids, you know, were not taking instruction, but they don't understand. So John, let's talk a little bit about that. We can encompass it in the intermediate level if you want, but there's a lot of misconceptions, a lot of misunderstandings out there of what we need to do and why things happen. So let's touch a little bit on that if we can.
Sure. The first thing that I tell people is that golf is intuitively opposite, meaning just what Pete said earlier, just said differently, that what you think may be correct is probably opposite. For golf, you want to hit it right, got to aim left, vice versa. So that's one of the things that you can teach, you can orate, you can even demonstrate, but until the aha moment, and with the intermediate golfer, there's a lot of aha moments. The other one is, do you really need more effort, or is it more about technique that allows effort to be more efficient? The story I always tell my clients, especially when they're looking for more distance, is me taking a lesson, almost 30 years ago from one of my mentors, Jimmy Hamilton in Raleigh, where he had me hitting wedges. And at the time I was hitting a wedge 135, 140, and he asked me to hit it 100 yards and tried to put it together with my driver saying, look, the reason why you're not hitting your driver well is because you're just out of control. You're out of balance. But he said it in a way that allowed me to learn from my mistake. I had that aha moment. And when I put the 100-yard wedge swing on a ball with a driver, I miraculously am hitting the best drives I had hit in quite a long time. But yet, I still in the back of my brain thought, wow, if I'm only swinging at 100 yards with this thing, can you imagine what I'd do if I swung at 100%? And then all of a sudden it goes sideways again. So a lot of the things that an intermediate golfer needs to learn has to be learned, but not necessarily by trial and error. It just has to be learned by error. And then sort of working backwards, as Pete said, to what's the correct. And one of the things I try to teach that intermediate golfer is, you know what, great decisions will always camouflage poor performance. Meaning you can set up correctly because you made the correct decision as to what shot to hit and what club to hit and so forth, and you may not hit it perfectly, but at least it's going to be a great miss. And that's what the intermediate golfer struggles with, that it's not a game of perfect. It is a game of misses. And once they can achieve those 3 aha moments, they tend to climb up to the next plateau rather quickly.
Yeah, well said. You know, one of the things that I asked Michael, and this is again our intermediate golfer that I spoke with yesterday. You know, one of the things I asked him is, you know, when he steps up to the first tee, what is he focusing on? What does he see? And you know, the first thing out of his mouth was, well, I'm looking at the pin. You know, I'm looking at where the pin is. Well, I said, you know, on a shorter hole, that's a little easier, but, you know, on a longer hole, if it's a par 4, par 5, it's not always easy to tell exactly where it's positioned. But I said, what else do you see when you're looking at, what are you thinking about when you're stepping up on that first tee? And typical amateur golfer, they're seeing and focusing on a lot of the trouble, you know, bunkers, you know, water hazards, what have you. They're not really focusing on the target, where they want the ball to go, where they're trying to position the ball. And conversely, a pro, when they step up to that tee, they're looking in reverse. And Pete, I think you would agree with this. You know, they're certainly, you know, cognizant of where the trouble is, but they're not focusing, and they're not sitting there in their mind saying, well, I don't want to hit it in the bunker, or I don't want to hit it over to that water. They know where the trouble is, but they're focusing on the specific task at hand, and that is to put it in the best position that's going to give them a increased opportunity to hit that next shot into the green, or depending on the hole in that. And that's what they're thinking about. They're not thinking about all the trouble, whereas the amateur has the opposite. And Pete, that's something that we have to try to, you know, sort of train our beginning golfers, in particular our intermediate golfers, to focus on. Is that kind of what you're doing as well?
Well, absolutely. I like to take, in as far as a mental golf class, I like to take them out to a par 3 and we'll stand on the tee box and I'll say, what do you see? And inevitably, nobody sees the green.
Right.
And there's a bunker, there's water, there's, you know, and they'll ask me, what do you see? I said, oh, that's a funny card over there. Look at that bird flying over there. And, you know, so I'll tease them a little bit and say, you know, I'm looking around at the surrounding areas, but I said, you know, I'm looking at the green and where I'm going to hit my ball on it. I said, so there's a little bit different perspective in what you're doing there, because it goes back to, you know, they're always looking where the fault is. You know, amazingly, a guy will step up on the tee and hit a ball, you know, 50 yards right out of bounds, and then he tees another one up and hits the next ball right next to it, because that's the only thing he's thinking about. And so you have to get them to say, you know, what's the object of the tee shot in the first place? To put the ball in the fairway as far down as you can, not to hit it as far as you can and hope it lands in the fairway. So first of all, you have to take a club that's going to enable you to put it in play. Now, that may not be a driver. You know, I used to tell them when I warmed up, the last 10, 15 shots I hit with a driver only to see if I could use it. If it's going crooked on the driving range, that's going to double magnify on the first tee. And so you have to look in perspective of what are we trying to achieve here. The tee shot's goal is to put it in play as far down as you can. So what club is going to comfortably allow you to do that? And if you're going to pull the driver out and your blood pressure is going to go up, the grip's going to get tighter, your arms are going to strangle the thing. You know, the tighter you hold it, you know, the slower it's going to swing.
Right.
And so, and the other thing I try to tell them, and something I always came up with when you're talking about distance, I said, if you try to hit it hard, you'll hardly hit it. But if you hardly hit it, you'll hit it hard.
Right.
You know, and so when you try to kill it, it doesn't go anywhere. You know, the one guy that says, well, I'll just take a little swing and punch it out of the trees, and they mow it 50 yards across the fairway. You know, it's because they really, you know, they take an easy swing and they actually contact it. But as John was saying previously, when you slow things down, you can actually speed the club up. because, they used to tell sprinters, I want you to sprint this 100 yards and run as hard as you can. And then I want you to run at 80%. And at 80%, they went faster because they weren't as tense.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
And so it's a lot of that, too. So I think in those pictures, it's just getting them to understand, there's trouble out there, but where are you trying to put your ball? Where do you see your ball landing?
Pete, one of the best examples I've ever seen of that is 2 or 3 scenes out of Bagger Vance. Hollywood did a hell of a job just setting up the final putt on the final green, the first tee shot, the out shot when Matt Damon hit it, just sliced the living you-know-what out of it, and he was able to see the shot through the trees. That's what happens with the better golfer, and the intermediate golfer just can't put that together. It goes back to what Pete was saying. What do you see? They just don't see what inevitably needs to take place. And if you're an intermediate golfer and want to totally understand what Pete and you and I are talking about, go back and look at Bagger Vance. It's a fantastic example.
Yeah, that's true. That's a great point, John. Thank you for mentioning that. And just very quickly, we don't need to get into a big thing because I want to move on to the advanced because I see our time's moving here. But again, going back to as with the beginning golfer, obviously we want to balance the time depending on their skill level, but balance some range time with some on-course time as well. And I think with an intermediate golfer, again, depending on their level and abilities, I would say that I would try to encourage them and get them more out in the course because now, we want to work on, as I said, we want to work on getting them more consistent, hitting the ball with more confidence. But I also think, I want them to understand and think their way around the golf course and not just, hit balls on the range and until they hit it pretty. I want them to be thinking and using their noggin, if you will, out in the golf course and creating scenarios. And it could be, like you said, Pete, earlier, just maybe doing some chipping to the green and on the green and maybe some short pitch shots from 100 yards in initially until they sort of zero in on that more effectively. But that's really, I think, for an intermediate golfer, when it comes to sort of balancing that range and course time, certainly I think we want to get them more out in the golf course, but we certainly need to make sure that they're prepared for it, as John indicated earlier. All right, let's move on to the advanced golfer. Pete, I'm going to let you start off on this one. Of course, our advanced player, things to touch on, of course, we want to check up on the fundamentals, as always, with all of our levels, doesn't matter whether beginning, intermediate, or advanced, or even the expert professional level. Again, ball flight laws, they have usually by this point, your more advanced players have a little bit or certainly a better understanding of what it's all about. We might want to talk to them about club face angle, club head path, centeredness of contact and angle of approach, and of course club head speed. We're going to talk to them a little bit more about that, I think, at this level. Would you agree with that, Pete?
Well, yeah, I think so. Obviously, the more advanced you get, it's going to become more precise for where they're hitting it, as far as the position on the club face that they hit it. So you give them a little bit of understanding of what is happening, what the difference is in the different impact factors from face path, angle, how the speed and spin are going to affect what they're doing with it, how to effectively use the bounce, because a lot of them don't know how to do that in the wedge shots. But, yeah, I think you're getting a little bit more precise because now, in order for them to score efficiently, they have to make fewer errors. And so you have to get them more efficient at what they're doing. And I always like them when I'm talking to the more advanced players, I always tell them, I said, the more time you put in preparing yourself for a shot that you can do, the better shots you're going to hit. So you have to understand and prepare yourself for each one that you're going to hit and understand what you want to do. And in that practice time, you have to start taking those shots and repeat those motions. I have a whole system that I built with practices from all the different areas, and it's all based on drills. And they do drills for a reason, and the drills are there so that they can run through those each individual drills, and that builds the pieces together for the swing. But they're there so they can get comfortable with what they're doing. But I think so with the flight monitors that we have now with my more advanced players. I'll get it out. I'll let them hit some shots. I'll let them see what the numbers are. I'll get a little bit more detailed in the video analysis with the numbers that I use and getting them to understand movements between horizontal and vertical movement and those types of things. But I think because their scoring dictates it, they need to be a little bit more precise in what they're doing with their contact and their shot making, and also the short game shots in order to stay at that advanced level.
Yeah, well said, by the way. John, I think along the lines of what Pete's talking about here, with your more advanced player, you can be a little bit, I think, more aggressive in your coaching and your teaching abilities with this particular player. First off, they're going to understand, as I mentioned earlier about the lingo, they're going to understand a little bit more about what you're talking about, especially if you get into discussing, ball flight, not necessarily ball flight laws, but angle of attack and that sort of thing with the players. They're going to understand, have a better grasp. What are some things that you can think of maybe that you can add to the discussion that you're going to want to make sure that the advanced player really focuses on more so than what the other two categories would be?
Probably it becomes even more important as you get better, as Pete said and touched on, short game. The more precise around the greens, the more precise on the green, the more precise within 125 yards, the better. And when you look at, say, a Zach Johnson and some of the other not as long players on the PGA Tour, this is what differentiates them from other people who may be a little bit slight in build or not as physically strong as somebody else. That's huge. And then to expand upon what Pete does, and I know he's done this, I've seen him do it with some people, is you've got to take this technical skill and merge it into some type of consequential practice. Drills are fantastic, but you can't go out on the golf course thinking drills all the time. There's been very few people who have been successful that way.
Right.
What the great players do that the advanced player can take a page out of their book is to put your game under pressure on the practice facility, take it out on the golf course and play mini games with yourself, very similar to the beginner golfer. So you're starting at 100 yards. Well, now instead of hitting, say, a 3-wood 100 yards, you're very capable of hitting a wedge or a gap wedge or even a lob wedge that far. What are you going to do? What are the expectations and what are the consequences if you don't meet those expectations? This helps you prepare for those stressful situations you may find yourself in time to time on the golf course. So now not only are you better physically prepared, you're going to be better mentally prepared as well.
Right. Is this a player, guys, and feel free to just sort of an open forum here for either one. Is this a player, again, going back to my other question about sort of balance between range and course time, is this a player that maybe you would like to see spend more time in your sessions out on the golf course working on certain areas that maybe they still need tweaking on, because their ball striking by this point, if they're an advanced player, they're playing better than bogey golf more often. I'm not saying they don't get a bogey here and there. Of course they all do, but they're playing more consistent golf. Is this a player that you want to work out more on the course and have less range time during your sessions? John, what about you?
It's based on what they're telling me they need, or at least they feel they need. I also base it strategically on what their statistics are saying, because they let's face it, the range, the practice area is a laboratory. Until you get it out in the real world and let it sink or swim, you're really not going to know how that laboratory rat's going to act. So the statistics are sort of the story behind that. And if the statistics are saying, hey, we're having trouble off the tee, then yeah, we're gonna put you on the tee more often and just give you reasons to hit tee shots and different ways to hit tee shots. If it's around the green and the statistics say you're always long and left, well, let's put you long and left and give you more of that simulation, so you can start not only achieving it physically, but the more you put yourself in that moment. You hear it from all the great players, regardless of the sport. They want to have the ball. They want to be the person to take the last shot or be the last person up to hit the home run. The golfer's got to be ready to do the same thing, be in that position to hit that shot for them to achieve what they're looking to achieve, whether it's reducing their handicap, shooting their all-time low score, winning a club tournament or a local amateur tournament. It doesn't matter. It's still all the same. You've got to put yourself in that moment.
Right. Well said, guys. We've got about 10, maybe just a little shy of 10 minutes here, and I thought this would be an interesting. So I'll give you guys a few minutes each, and Pete, I'll go to you, and then John, I'll let you finish up. But I want you to, because we're on I said the cusp of the U.S. Open, of course, this weekend up at Oakmont. From a beginning, intermediate, and advanced player, and I'm talking amateur only here. What should each of them, just maybe a quick synopsis of each level, what should they be looking at? Obviously, you want them to enjoy the tournament, but what should they be looking to take away from the tournament at each of those different levels? What should they be looking at and focusing on when they're watching this? Pete, I'll let you go.
I think
so. Begin.
What I tell all levels of players that I want you to watch how meticulous they are in how they set up, how they go about looking at different shots around the greens. When they're faced with a situation, what do you see them doing? How are they looking at a particular shot? So many times you'll watch them, they're just off the green, and you watch them step up on the green, and they're looking around the green, and, what do you think they're doing in those situations? And how can you benefit from what you see? But I think for the most part, I like to see, look how patient they are. They're playing in a decent amount of time. Now, this is the U.S. Open because that could slow it down a bit. But they're very meticulous in what they do. They do the same routines over and over again. And so you can really benefit by just watching their mannerisms, watch how they move, watch how they walk. You can always tell players who are playing good versus ones that aren't playing good by the way they're moving around the golf course. So try to look at the mannerisms. I always like them to, if you can get to the tee boxes, watch how particular they are with what they do. I mean, they do the same thing every time. The caddy comes up or doesn't, it's always the same routine. And I think that puts them in a level of comfort that allows them to do what they want to do. And I also said, now watch them, too, when you find a situation where a player is going to hit a shot but stops. They start all over again. They don't just say, oh, hey, that guy distracted me. Let me go hit this. Some of them will even put the club back in the bag and start the whole situation over again. So I wanted just to watch their total mannerisms and how they conduct themselves. And I think it's really a good eye-opener to see just exactly what they're doing, how they're playing, and what they foresee and look at, not only when they have good shots, but also when they're in trouble. I always tell them, a double bogey is a bad shot followed by a dumb one. That's usually what happens. Right. And so you have to watch yourself when you hit it out of play. Watch how they maneuver themselves back into play. There's very few exceptions with the Dailies and the Bubbas who will, try to knock it through the tree instead of, just putting one back in the fairway. But I think if they can really pay attention to what they're doing, I think, from every level, I think it just helps them to understand that, when you're going to play golf on a good, consistent level, there are reasons why they play like they do, and it's not always because of how they swing. It's how they prepare themselves. Right.
Well said. John, one of the things that the group of boys said to me yesterday, and particularly the intermediate golfer, that one thing that he picked up on was that he noticed that, the professionals make it look so easy. Their swings, seem so effortless. It's very smooth and silky in many ways. There's not a lot of jerky movements, with the players. And, he was just in awe of how far they were able to and how accurate they were able to be. So, when you're talking to your students this week, obviously you want them, number one, to have fun and enjoy the U.S. Open tournament. You don't want them to, it's not necessarily a lesson period, but is there anything that you would maybe encourage them to notice while they're watching the tournament, pay attention to that maybe they could incorporate in their games or take a lesson, if you will, by watching what the pros do, as Pete suggested?
I tell you what, Pete, I'm going to say ditto on everything you just said, because I can't really say it differently and emphasize it much better than what Pete did. The one word I always, or the phrase I like to use, is decision making. It goes back to what Pete said. It's not watch how they handle adversity. They handle it better because they've been in the moment more often, and They've got what I call this file cabinet full of experiences that they can pull upon. They can just pull a file out anytime they want to cover almost any condition or situation they've been in, and that's why they are more cool, calm, collected. And the ones that aren't, you'll tell. You'll see it. You'll see it in their body language, as Pete said. I've got a potential high school golfer I'm working with now, and he asked a similar question. I'm watching the U.S. Open this weekend. It's Father's Day. I'm going out to play golf with my dad and so forth. And any ideas? And give me some clues as to what to look for. And I basically told him, if everybody on TV is going to look like they do things a whole lot easier than you. What I want you to imagine is all the experiences they have that you haven't, and catalog some of those things that you think are going to be more apropos to you right now to get you where you want to be, which is making the high school team. And he sort of looked at me puzzled, and I said, physically, you're a good athlete. We have to get your athleticism more efficient hitting the golf ball, but really pay attention to what these people don't do, not necessarily what they do. It's what they don't do that adds up, and they don't do it because of all these experiences they have in their brain, their filing cabinet. And if you can find one or two things out of the weekend as you watch that you can emulate, that you can put into your play, even as not so advanced as you are, that's going to help you not only short-term but long-term.
Right. Well said, guys. There's a reason why I enjoy having both of you on the program is not just, your experiences, but obviously that plays a major factor. But, you really, keep it real in the discussion. And, you don't add a lot of fluff, and that's one thing I don't want in the program is I want to make sure that we're giving people the best information that we can based on our experiences, and in order to help. One of the things that was a little bit disturbing talking to these guys yesterday was again, and I, there's that could be a whole conversation on another show, but really a lot of the misunderstandings that they had. Just because they're going by what they see. Pete, you mentioned about being able to take away from watching these guys on TV this weekend. It's a shame, really, that we don't see more of the bad shots televised. Obviously, for editing purposes and for enjoyment, they're going to show more of the better shots. But it would be interesting to see more of the players when things don't go their way, how they handle themselves. Because I think most amateur golfers would be surprised that the professionals certainly are going to do things a little bit differently, but they have bad shots as well. And I think it would make the amateur golfers feel a little bit better if they knew that Rory McIlroy or Zach Johnson or somebody else hits it in the woods or skips the pond or gets in a hazard of some sort just as easily as they can. So these are things I wish that a lot of the amateur golfers would see more of on TV, just to give them an understanding that it happens even to the best golfers in the world. So, guys, as always, thank you very much, John and Pete, for being on the Coach's Corner panel. Great discussion tonight. I enjoyed that, and I hope the golfers tuning in, and also the coaches and other teaching pros that are tuning into the show, I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation as well. So thank you very much, guys, and enjoy the U.S. Open this weekend. And happy Father's Day.
You bet. Thanks, Ted. Thanks for having us on. It's always a pleasure, and it's great what you're doing. It's great for the game, and we really appreciate what you do.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Sorry, John, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ted.
I was just going to say, as I've mentioned many, many times, I enjoy doing this for a myriad of reasons. I think it's great that we can, come together as a group and in these discussions and talk about some of the things that are going on and some of the things that people are struggling with. We always try to do this in our day-to-day lives as teachers and coaches and that, but sometimes it's good to get other perspectives in there and other discussions and give not just the average golfer out there an opportunity, but give some of the others in our industry an opportunity to learn from others. Many times I've had much feedback on the program from other golf professionals and other coaches and that said, boy, I like what so-and-so said, last week. I'm going to incorporate that into my teaching, or I didn't realize that, especially some of our younger guys out there. So that's really why I do it, is to help one another. But John, thank you as well for coming on the show. I always appreciate your input.
Well, thanks, Ted, and again, Pete, thank you. It's good to hear your voice, and look forward to seeing you again soon. And I can't agree more with Pete, Ted, that this particular medium provides, I'm going to call it, a more simplistic look at things. There's so much information out there, and there's so many numbers and positions and things that you can and can't do and so forth. And I think what this arena, this environment brings out is the capability of anything's possible, and it doesn't have to necessarily fit into a box. Your triangle can fit into the box if you want it to. You just have to be creative enough to do it and pull the resources together to do it, and you certainly have been doing that for a while, and appreciate the opportunity to share that experience with you.
Well, I'm again, thank you, gentlemen, for your kind words, and you always have a home here, if you will, on Golf Talk Live, and especially on the Coach's Corner panel. So, guys, have a great weekend. Thank you very much again for your time, and have a great U.S. Open. Watch with great intensity, and we'll see what happens later Sunday afternoon.
You bet.
Thanks.
It should be fun.
All right, thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
All right, that was the Coach's Corner panel. Of course, John Hughes and Pete Buchanan have been on the show many, many times. I got another guest coming on here just a moment or two. I'm just going to get him ready in the chute, as they say. And, of course, I'm talking about my very special guest, Paul Kaster. Paul was on the show about a month ago, I guess it was. He was on the Coach's Corner panel, and wanted to bring him back, as I did with John a few weeks back, as a featured guest, just to talk a little bit more, give you guys a chance to know a little bit more about him and what he's all about. And he's he's a golf coach, and he's also the director of instruction at the Forsgate Country Club. But before I bring him on, let me just remind everybody, I wasn't on last week, so I didn't get a chance to do this. But since we are on the cusp of a major championship, I, of course, been running a contest this year. We started before the Masters. Billy Casper's son, Byron Casper, was on the Thursday eve of the Masters. We introduced a contest here. It's called the Golf Talk Live Major Champion Couples Contest. Here's what you win, and then I'll tell you how you play real quick. What you win is a one-night bed and breakfast at the Hacienda Hotel in Old Town, San Diego, golf for two at Salt Creek Golf Club, a second night at bed and breakfast at the Palm Mountain Hotel and Spa, also out in the San Diego area, golf for two at the Encina Golf Club. You also win, for the two of you, lunch at the Old Town Tequila Factory, which is going to be hosted by Byron Casper. Byron, of course, is an international PGA member and instruction, and, of course, son of the legendary professional golfer Billy Casper. Included in that prize is going to be a copy of Billy Casper's last book, The Big Three and Me, which he came on the show a few years ago and talked about. So the value of the prize is actually in excess of about $1,000. Airfare is not included, but you've got 2 nights, 2 different great locations, the Hacienda Hotel in Old Town San Diego and the Palm Mountain Hotel and Spa also there, and a couple of great rounds of golf in there, as well as lunch with Byron Casper at the Old Town Tequila Factory. Simple way to play is this. For those of you that have tuned in the past, all you have to do is submit your entry, pick who you think is going to win this weekend's major championship out of the field. You've had a chance to see who the field is today. You have until Friday midnight to submit your entry. And what will happen is, for every correct entry, it'll go into a draw. And then the Thursday evening after the last major, which would be the PGA Championship this year, Byron will be joining me back on the show, and we're going to draw the name of the couple and announce the prize net. So submit your entries. You email it to golftalklivecontest@gmail.com. That's golftalklivecontest@gmail.com. Submit who you think by Friday midnight, which is tomorrow midnight, who you think is going to be the winner of this weekend's major championship, the U.S. Open, of course, at Oakmont. And we'll put that in the hat, if you will, and we'll of all the correct entries. Now, you get an opportunity, of course, for those of you that submitted for the Masters. You can also submit for the British Open and also the PGA Championship. You're allowed to have multiple entries, only one, of course, per championship, but you had up to 4 entries in total per individual. and would love to have you participate in that. So again, the email address to send them to, make sure you have all of your contact information there as well, your full name, address, and full contact information as well, and submit your entry, who you think is going to win this weekend's U.S. Open by Friday midnight, which is tomorrow, and June 17th, to golftalklivecontest@gmail.com. So good luck, everybody, and look forward to seeing some more entries. Again, I mentioned just a few moments ago my very special guest coming on the second half of the show is Paul Kaster. He's a golf coach and the director of instruction at the Forsgate Country Club, and he has been on the show, as I mentioned here earlier, about a month ago on the Coach's Corner panel, but I wanted to bring him back as a featured guest. We're going to talk about a couple things, but primarily talking about taking your game from the range or practice facility, if you will, out onto the golf course. We're going to talk about some other things as well, but let me bring on my very special guest, Mr. Paul Kaster. Good evening, Paul. Welcome back to Golf Talk Live.
Hi, Ted. Thanks so much for having me back.
Well, I appreciate it, and as I mentioned to you guys, I guess it was about a month ago when you were on, I wanted to have you come back on for a little bit longer period, just on your own, and have a chance to talk about some different things. And one of the things that we're going to talk about tonight, as I just alluded to, is we're going to talk about really how to get especially the average golfer. Now tonight, I don't know if you caught any of the earlier show, we talked about the beginning golfer, intermediate, and the more advanced golfers, and some of the differences and how we would approach things in our teaching methods and things like that. But you wanted to talk about really how we can help some of the players out there transfer their practice on the course, or to the golf course rather, and help to improve their skills. So let's talk about that. First off, let's say with the beginning golfer, obviously it's a little bit different kettle of fish. What are you looking for with the beginning golfers to really help them navigate their way out in the golf course? What are some things that you're trying to get them to incorporate in their beginning?
I think when you're just starting off with golf, there's still a lot of skill building that has to be done. So you're still learning how to hold the golf club, how to swing it, and there's a lot of technique that needs to be learned. But how to play, how to make decisions, things like that, it still should be part of the instruction, I think. And some of the things that I see, so much are people just hitting driver on every tee that they have the opportunity to hit it. That's kind of one example, instead of learning to hit a hybrid that is going to end up being like one of their, favorite golf clubs for advancing the golf ball around the golf course, and learning to hit that 5 or 4 hybrid off of the tee so that they get really comfortable with that, keeping the ball in play and not having to deal with penalty strokes and disappointment, and then, building a game around keeping the ball away from penalty situations and generating some confidence instead of, struggling with the driver, which is the longest, club in your bag, obviously, and harder to hit when you're just learning how to swing. So that's, I think, a really big one. And learning how to hit a basic chip, a bump and run chip around the greens. I actually have a lot of students chip with, a lofted hybrid. You see a lot more 5 and 6 hybrids in sets of clubs these days, and I think it's such an easy shot, and the heads on those clubs are so forgiving that if you have somebody choke down almost to the shaft and make a putting stroke with that club, it's pretty hard to hit a bad shot, and it's just another kind of thing in their arsenal that they're going to be doing from the very beginning of their golf, rather than like going back and learning it as they advance. So I find myself teaching a lot of advanced players how to hit that shot, because all I've ever done was hit wedges, around the green. I think things like that.
Yeah, and I think also too, Paul, I think one of the things, that we want with the sort of differencing the beginning golfer is really we want to educate them more on how to prepare themselves to hit those good shots. In other words, with good fundamentals, good setup, good grip, that sort of thing. Whereas the more advanced players, it becomes more of a strategic. They already have a pretty good understanding of, if they're playing, better than bogey golf, as I indicated in our earlier segment on Coach's Corner. if they're playing better than bogey golf, they have a general understanding, and that's not to say we don't want to cover some of those fundamentals again, just to make as a refresher course, but we want to get more into strategy, help them think their way around a little bit better on the golf course. And conversely, with some of the intermediate golfers and even the beginning golfers, and as you alluded to here in your notes, and I want to make sure we touch on that as well, is we want to be able to provide them with and improving their skills without allowing them to get bogged down with too many mechanical thoughts. And that's something that's very common with the earlier, less seasoned golfers, the beginning golfers, and even the intermediate golfers, is they get too mechanical in their swing. They're thinking too many thoughts are coming in their head, and they're not really focusing on just swinging the club. So how do you sort of find a balance with some of the students that you're working with, especially your beginning golfers, that not to get too bogged down with the mechanics?
I think when you're first learning how to do any like motor skill, you have to think about what you're doing.
Sure.
And so, if you compare it to like riding a bike or learning how to tie your shoes, at the very beginning, you have to be very conscious of what you're doing. And then over time, it becomes easier to the point that at some point you just forget that you're doing it completely. That's what you want to see with the golf swing too, hopefully. I think it's just that I think the culture of golf and golf instruction is so strong in kind of the direction of the fix and the mechanical answer, that people really believe that if they fix things on the golf course that they'll play better.
Right.
And so I think at some point you have to be able to let go of the conscious thought. So with beginning golfers, it's okay to think about how do you hit what are the mechanics of a putting stroke? Should I be making a hinge, or is it kind of a one lever, action? I think to some degree thinking about that's necessary unless they're practicing an awful lot, because they may not have, a beginning golfer may only be on the golf course one day a week.
Right.
And they may not have a lot of practice time. So it's kind of mixing in thoughts about technique with, okay, so I have a lake in front of me and there's a little fairway over to the right there, and I can probably lay up to the right and then hit a shot, safely onto the green instead of take a big risk, and kind of being able to get outside of yourself a little bit and make those choices instead of staying so stuck with the kind of body oriented thoughts,
Right. Would you agree that particularly with your advanced players, that you really want to get into more of that type of understanding with them? You want them to take more of a risk assessment while they're on the golf course, because a lot of players, even some of the advanced players, get out there and, like you said, they want to take a chance and try to hit it over the lake, and maybe less forgiving as opposed to, they don't want to necessarily bail out, as some people might put it, out to the right where that safe landing area is. They want to try and go for it, and obviously a myriad of issues can come to, including a bad score on that particular hole. So is that something that you try to work with some of your better players that you're working with, is to get them to understand sort of a risk assessment and looking at the whole picture and then making a game plan from there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I teach a class called Lowest Score Wins. It's based on a book that a couple of friends wrote, Dave Wedzik and Eric Barzeski. So understanding stats and kind of the probabilities of golf, I think, are really important for a good player, for anyone. But I talk a lot with better players, especially, but also kind of intermediate or relative beginners about what their expectations should be, because they see golf on TV and just a continuous kind of highlight reel of great shots, and they think that that's what they should be aspiring to. And so a lot of times I'll ask somebody, for example, like, how close do you think the average PGA Tour player hits their sand wedge to the target, to a flag? And pretty common answers are like 5-8 feet. And the actual answer is like 17 feet.
Right.
And, so once you start to understand that even the greatest players in the world aren't that precise. And you have to understand what the window of for a 4-iron is versus a window for a 7-iron versus a window for a sand wedge, what your shot pattern is, and how to kind of take that and apply it to your target. You start to see scores go down because people aren't playing for perfection anymore. Better players really believe that they can hit the shot they see in their head. They think that they're going to do exactly what they want to do. And
they have that they have that confidence.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot of times it's just not realistic. I mean, I know if I I'm still an okay player, and if I hit a green with a 4-iron, I'm pretty pleased. Yeah. So, I think it's some of that for sure is educating them on what really good golfers do, what reasonable expectations are, how to game plan based on that, how to aim at, the fatter part of greens, even if you have a wedge or a 9-iron in your hand, because we all, pull shots or do things like that, and once they start thinking strategically, scores go down, I think quite a bit. And, the game gets a lot more fun because you're not putting so much pressure on yourself to hit, perfect shots all the time.
Exactly. I mentioned something in the last segment on Coach's Corner as we were wrapping up just before you came on. And, I said that, during this weekend, of course, you're going to see, for the most part, you're going to see some good golf, and you might see a few bad shots here and there. Obviously, you're going to see a little bit more than you traditionally in some of your regular tournaments, just because the conditions are going to be much tougher. So a lot of the players are going to have some, slick greens to deal with and difficult rough and so forth. But, I really wish, and I understand the reason why they do it for editing purposes and stuff like that, but I really wish that the average golfer could see a better example like you just talked about, with the wedge play and that these guys are not always hitting it in within 5 feet. I mean, we're seeing the best shots out there, but we're not seeing their full 18, whole round. So we're not seeing, when Phil might, hit it out into the right rough, or he might hit it into the woods or something like that, which I know is not going to happen very often. But, I wish the average amateur could get a better understanding of just, that these guys can hit some bad shots along the way and not just see all of their good shots. And I think it would be a little bit better, more relatable for the average golfer, I think, and make it easier for them to understand.
I totally agree. I think that we're seeing the great shots because that's who's leading the tournament, and they're playing well above their statistical, norms. I mean, it's how many PGA Tour players play their whole career and are relatively pleased to get like 4 or 5 wins, right? So when they're playing that well, they're playing way outside of where they normally play, and it's not representative, I guess, is, what we're saying, right? I mean, I think the really good rounds, something I say to a lot of my students is the really good rounds that I've played in my life. I've shot 29 a couple of times for 9 holes. I've shot low numbers for 18 holes. It usually, I usually played really well because I overcame a mistake or a bad shot, not because I didn't have any.
Right. Right. You capitalized on your misses, and and that's the thing is, you're going to hit some good shots no matter what round you're in, but you're going to more often not hit some not so good shots, and it's how you handle those difficult situations. That's why, so many people say golf mimics life in so many ways, and that's true, really, if you think about it, because, you're met with different challenges on the golf course, much like you are in real life, and it's how you handle that. I was mentioning earlier, again in the segment, that I had the opportunity yesterday while I was preparing for tonight's show to sit down with 5 youngsters from most of them from Indiana. They were all related. Age was ranging from 10 to 19 was the oldest, and just sort of picking their brains on what they look. Most of them were beginning golfers, but there was an intermediate in there. And what was interesting was they never really thought about how golf really kind of does mimic life in so many ways, and how out in the golf course, when you're faced with these challenges, they're very similar to challenges that you might, meet in everyday life. And they never looked at it from that perspective. So that it gave them a whole different appreciation of golf as a game, as opposed to just sort of chasing a white ball around and getting it into the fewest strokes possible around 18 holes. They looked at it from a much different perspective, and I was glad I was able to leave that with them. Paul, I want to talk about as we move on here, an interesting statement, I guess, if you will, that you put into the notes. You wanted to talk about needing to separate training from playing. And in quotations you've got beside it, we train so we can trust. And you talked about that a little bit. Obviously we want to prepare so that we gain that confidence and able to navigate. I want to read one other thing, and then I want you to get your thoughts on it here. Obviously most players try to play golf with a lot of swing thoughts, again, working on mechanical thoughts and so forth. Why doesn't that work on a long-term basis? Certainly in certain situations, especially for beginning golfers, you got to be thinking of certain things as you're understanding and developing your golf game. But as you progress on to a more advanced player, why is that a danger? And why do we need to separate our training time from our playing time? Why is that important?
I think it's the way our brains work. I think sometimes playing with a new swing thought can be comforting because it's something to focus your mind on while you're playing. And since you may not have been playing very well recently, if you have something that you're thinking about that's helping your ball striking, it can help you hit the ball better, and it can also take your mind off of the fact that you weren't hitting it so well recently.
Right.
But the fact is that when you really play well, you are in a state of kind of flow. I've been there. I think most of us who've played our best rounds, people say it feels really easy. It doesn't really matter whether you're a scratch player or a tournament player or a 10 handicap. The students who play their best, who I talk to, kind of say the same stuff, and they get into this place where they're not really thinking at all, and they're just looking at targets, seeing the shot that they have to hit. They take all of the factors into consideration, and then they play the shot. And it's, compare it to a pitcher playing in a game and trying to throw strikes, or thinking about curveballs or sliders or whatever. That pitcher is not thinking about his mechanics in the heat of the moment while he's trying to throw those curveballs. He knows how to throw a curveball. He's doing what he knows how to do, and he's able to kind of get into a state of just kind of free motion and execution, I guess. So, the times that I've played great in my life, it felt like time stood still almost. Things were very, quiet, and you don't get there by having a lot of mechanical thoughts. So I do really believe that you have to go through phases of learning, kind of where you learn the new skill, but then you've learned it. Hopefully you've learned it in a way that you can apply it on the golf course, and then hopefully in competition, and then forget that you really ever learned it in the first place. That you're
right.
You don't have to think about it anymore.
Right, it gets built into your psyche in a sense, and it's sort of every day, and that's so true. Paul, one of the things I think that through time and effort, this is why I think a lot of amateurs don't understand when if you're going to go through the trouble of connecting with a golf coach or a teaching professional for lessons. One of the biggest mistakes I think a lot of amateurs make is they'll go for the lesson, but then they don't follow up and practice what they've learned in that lesson, and they don't put it to use and really focus on and whether through drills or whatever, and then they go back for the next lesson maybe a few weeks later, depending on what the schedule is, and they've really not retained anything from the previous one because they really haven't put it into motion, and that's a big issue as well. So, how do we sort of crack that nut, if you will, with some of the players out there? I mean, time is obviously difficult for some people. But obviously there's things that we can do away from the golf course, at home drills, things that we can do. With some of the members at Forsgate, what do you try to do to encourage them if they don't or can't spend a lot of time on the practice range? What do you try to do to get them, if they're coming in for lessons, to make sure that they're working on some of the fundamentals or some of the key issues that you've addressed?
I teach members and non-members, and I think we talk about what their schedules look like and how much time they can devote to improving, and the fact that when you go for a golf lesson, it isn't just the information. It's right. You have to be able to kind of take that information and turn it into a motor skill, right? And that happens through repetition and feedback, and so we talk about that process a little bit. And then, I think you run into some people who really don't like practicing on the range, but for the most part, people are willing to do some work. And I think you can do a lot of good work on the course too. So, depending on what somebody's preference is, how much time they have in their schedule, you can create a practice plan where they're scoring their practice on the range, learning the skill that we've just worked on. Say, for example, you're trying to teach somebody how to, shallow the club out and swing it kind of from in to out or on plane. Teach them how to set up a pool noodle that's going to help them do that, and then put an alignment rod out on the range a few feet ahead of them, and have them try to get the ball on one side or the other of the rod while they're missing that pool noodle. And for their practice for each ball, based on, did it feel like the contact was flush? Did the ball start to the right or the left of the stick? Did I transfer my weight, or was I on balance? Was I balanced when I hit the shot? Do sets of 5 balls, and do 5 sets of 5, and see what your average score is, and then track that over time. And suddenly they're actually competing against themselves, trying to learn a new skill, and it's a lot more engaging, and it's like measurable. They can track, which I think is really important for practice to be effective. So creating little, practice plans like that, that's, 25 golf balls. But if somebody's going through a full pre-shot routine, every time they hit one of those shots, it can actually take a fair amount of time, and it gives them a chance to reflect on what they're doing. And, I think it works pretty well. I think going out on the golf course and working on things is also really helpful too. And there are ways to do that, that are, I think, useful for transferring that new motion into kind of the playing environment, so that we do that also.
And you're talking about now what we're talking about really here, and I want you just to sort of briefly explain to the listeners out there so they understand what we're talking about here. Is we're talking about really, block practice versus transfer training. So in other words, you want to set up, as you talked about, setting up a station using the pool noodles as an example, and a shallow, a rod or something out a little further out, so that they can use it as a guide for their target. Explain very quickly, if you can, or briefly, first off, what you mean by block practice, and then transfer training, and how each it sort of applies, and what people need to understand about both.
Sure. Yeah. I didn't come up with those ideas. That I've spent some time with Rick Jensen. He's a very famous sports psychologist and a great guy. And I've gone through his certification programs, and it's basically the ideas of the block practice is kind of the practice that most of us do. You see most people doing on a driving range, where they hit a bucket of balls and they hit at the same target with the same club, and it feels very good to be able to hit a whole bucket of, or half of a bucket of 7 irons to the 150, and be repetitious like that, except that really doesn't bear any resemblance to golf.
Right.
And so, we have to do that kind of practice at first to learn how to do, how to swing the golf club in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm trying to change my motion, shallow the club out, start the ball to the right of the stick, to use that example, that's, that would be block practice. If you just did that, it wouldn't end up transferring to the course probably. You have to be able to kind of take that concept and go out on the golf course, find a way of working on it on the golf course, probably when you're not trying to shoot a score, and then, get comfortable with hitting shots on the course using that concept, and then eventually take it into play, try to shoot a score, applying what you've learned. And by going through these stages, you're developing a motor pattern that eventually becomes permanent, or relatively speaking. So the last step would be, if you're a competitive player, being able to go out in competition and hit shots and not see the miss that you were seeing before that was the result of the old swing pattern. So carrying it through those stages.
Right, and one of the, I think, and I'm sure you'd agree with this, I think one of the problems that we see with a lot of, especially the higher handicap golfers and the less experienced golfers, get into that mode, if you will, in practice where, as you put it here in your notes, sort of rapid fire practice. They're just sort of raking and hitting balls after balls, as you said, 7 iron, hitting it comfortably to 150 yards, but it's not really resembling, real course situation. And I like how you put it here, that it's really not helping somebody's anxiety, and they're not really getting real gains by doing that. And you want them to be able to get that. You want them to be able to work on that new skill, and you want them to pick out their target and execute the shot and movement successfully, and then you want them to repeat it, but maybe using a different target. So you want to kind of mix it up a little bit so it's not getting repetitive. And I think that also alleviates the boredom for a lot of people out in the range too. Would you agree that a lot of them get out there and they get too repetitive and they lose interest? And that's part of the reason I think a lot of them don't want to spend much time or effort in practice, is they don't know how to practice with a purpose.
Oh, very much so. I think people go practice and then it doesn't work on the course, and then they wonder why they practice. Also, so I think it's how you practice, and if you find a way of making the practice a little bit more effective, you're going to see gains from it. But Mike Bender has an amazing range at his academy down in just outside of Orlando, and he's got this wedge range where the players have, I think it's like 8 or 10 targets inside of 100 yards, and they compete for who can hit the fewest number of shots and hit each one of those targets. And I think they're like 5x5 or 4x4. So, the players are basically hitting one shot at a time to different targets, resetting, going through a full routine, and that's basically what we're talking about. If you're learning, how to do something new in your golf swing, and all you do is the rapid fire repetition, it'll make you feel better. It'll probably calm you down because you'll start to see the ball fly well. But if you don't apply that in a kind of game-like, golf-like situation, then it's not going to be meaningful or transfer to the golf course. So once you feel like you've made some progress and you're starting to see the ball go high and maybe it's drawing a little bit, that's what you're trying to do, then you do absolutely need to start moving your targets around on the range if you're not going to go out onto the golf course and do it. And some of that depends on, if you're a member at a club, it's easier to go out on the course.
right.
and practice and kind of treat that like your practice ground. But, being able to hit a 5-iron with the same movement to a different target, going through a full pre-shot routine, full kind of intensity like you're on the golf course, and then switching and hitting another shot will really start to give you the feeling that you can execute it. And so that's kind of the transfer process.
Yeah, and I think that really for a lot of golfers out there, as I mentioned earlier, I had the opportunity to sit down with 5 youngsters yesterday, and I call them youngsters because they are compared to me, but some of the questions, and we're going to get into this a little bit here, particularly with the intermediate golfer. He was the better of the group, and he's played a little bit more and has a better understanding. But there were still some things that he was confused about, and we're going to talk about that as we move in here in a few moments into talk about game planning and that. But one of the things that you point out here, which is very, very difficult, I think, is getting the average golfers out there to transfer, if you will, from that mentality of sort of just raking the balls and that. And that's I think that's been a hard thing for the golf industry to do, is because we've come out with so many great ways for the average golfer to be out there, and different games for them to play and that. But for some reason, they still sort of revert back to that rake and hit ball mentality. How do we break that cycle? What can we do that we haven't already done in your mind differently? I mean, obviously some of the better players understand the value, as you just pointed out. They see the results from some of the training that you're providing. But there's a lot of golfers out there. Is it that they're not getting the results fast enough and are just not relying or don't have the patience to go through some of these changes? What's your take on that?
Oh, I think it's several different factors. I think the repetition feels really good.
Sure.
Golf is hard. And so if you can get to a point where you're repeating something very difficult and seeing that golf ball go where you want it to go, and the contact is good, that feels really good. And you see it even on PGA Tour ranges,
Sure.
So I think that tour players are getting to where they are and achieving what they're achieving, in a lot of cases not practicing in the most efficient way either. It's just that
Sure.
They have lots of gifts. But I think that, some of it is human nature. Some of it is, I think, is how the ranges are set up.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a mat with a ball tray right next to, where a right-hander would tee up a golf ball, and you pour your bucket of balls into that ball tray, it's that the range is set up for you to rake and hit.
Right.
So I think that to some degree you have to change that, and I'm not pretending that I know what the answer to that is. But I think that, I think it
right.
definitely is partly the issue. I think, offering lots of different targets on the range, and, ways to score your practice, and encourage, if there were signs on the range, on most ranges that said, something along the lines of like, hit 10 balls with your driver between, these 2 poles and count how many you get in between them, just as a suggestion, it could,
Sure.
Frame practice differently for people. And then they would start thinking about what they're doing in a different way, because that feels pretty good. If you can get 6 or 7 drivers out of 10, in between a 30-yard fairway on the range, then you're doing okay by most standards. So I think those are the issues there, and I think that a lot of golfers are kind of perfectionists, and so being able to do that repetition feels really good. And I'm not saying that I'm not somebody who's done a lot of that in my life
Sure.
also. So,
Yeah, I've got to raise my hand on that too, Paul, to be honest.
Sure.
I mean, we've all been guilty about it. But I think the thing is, as those of us in the golf industry, like you and I are, and many of the other guests on the show, we have a general understanding. There's nothing wrong with if you're doing a quick warm up or something before a round. Sometimes you have limited time. It's okay to do that just to warm up and that. But in a full blown practice session, you have to do it, as I said earlier, with the purpose. And I think a lot of the amateur golfers out there aren't really practicing with the purpose. Something else that you're a big proponent of course, is sort of keeping score of your practice and keeping your stats. And you mentioned a program here called shotbyshot.com, which is also available, and we'll read that again as we go. But that's important too, is sort of keeping track of your practice sessions as well, keeping some stats. One of the questions that was posed to me yesterday by the intermediate golfer, his name was Michael, and he was 17-year-old, and he asked me, he said, one of the biggest issues, and this sort of falls into this next category of game planning, so we'll hold off on that, but just I'll pose the question now, and then we can talk about that a little bit more as well. But one of the questions that he had is he doesn't always know what club to select. He has a general idea of what he hits a distance with his clubs, but not really a very accurate. So this is where this sort of comes in with the shot-by-shot, correct, format of keeping stats, so you understand the distances that your clubs are doing. How can, not everybody has the ability to get out there and measure, or has a laser a range finder, that sort of thing. And you can certainly get out on the ranges, but unless you get right in line with the distance markers, it's not always 100% accurate. So what are some suggestions that you can do for people what stats should they be keeping, what they should be looking at during their practice out in the range or out on the golf course? What should they be doing, and how does the shotbyshot.com program work?
So I use shot-by-shot with my client. It doesn't actually tell you how far you hit. It doesn't allow you to keep a record of how far you hit clubs. What it actually allows you to do is it allows the average player to get basically tour level stats on their skills. So proximity to the hole with their irons, with pitching, with chipping, sand play, putting stats that are pretty much exactly like the putting stats that PGA Tour players have. So the great thing about the program is that it's 20 years old and the body of data is very deep. It's like 250,000 rounds of golf in there. And Peter Sanders, who owns the company, also updates it with ShotLink data from the PGA Tour. So you can put your data in, enter your stats while you're playing, say whether you hit the green, whether you missed the fairway, was it in a bad spot, what did you have no shot, when you missed the fairway, how many putts did you have, and the distance of your first putt. And once you put all that information in there, after about 5 rounds, you have a very reliable set of, handicaps for each one of your skill areas, whether it's, driving, chipping, sand play, putting. And so he's able to handicap, each one of those areas and say, based on all of the data that I've got, you're putting like a tour player, but you're driving the golf ball like a 12 handicap.
Right.
So for a coach, it's extremely useful because most people aren't totally objective about what they need to be working on. And, we come to golf lessons mostly wanting to work on full swing, generally, I think. And so if you can get somebody to, start using this program, it's very, very useful in terms of exposing the things that might actually really help them score a lot better in a short period of time.
Yeah, obviously it's helping, like you said, from a coach's standpoint, it's helping you very quickly to be able to identify where they're having the trouble issues in their golf game. It's not always, this was something too when I had my conversation with these young gentlemen yesterday, and I asked them if you had the opportunity to speak with, a PGA coach or a PGA teacher professional, what would be some of the questions that you would ask them? And it was interesting because it was very much, even though most of them, other than the one, as I said, was more of an intermediate player, the others being more novice and more beginning type players, really asked a lot of the same question. How do I hit the ball further? How do I hold the club? What clubs do I select? It was all sort of generally the same questions that we hear from some of the older players that we work with from time to time, whether it be club members or if you're working at a resort or something. A lot of people come in with very similar questions, and something like you're describing here with shotbyshot.com is now they're able to identify, by using a tool like that, able to identify and help the person that they're working with, in your case, have a better understanding of where some of their trouble areas are, and gives you an idea of where to start on working a program with them.
Absolutely. It also gives them an idea of how they should prioritize their time practicing, which is, I think, goes back to what we were talking about before about how do you create a practice plan and, take advantage of the precious time that we've got. And so that's why I kind of promote it with my students, because it helps me be more efficient, help them the most I can, because I can't be out on the golf course with all of them, and it helps them take advantage of their time. And we all have other things going on in our lives. So if you don't want to be spending, 10 or 15 hours a week working on every aspect of your game, I can tell you that, I don't practice my full swing very much at all anymore, because, I just make sure that I'm kind of staying in touch with my golf swing, because my shot-by-shot stats tell me that I'm pretty good ball striker. That's really not what I need to be focused on.
Right.
So it kind of frees you up.
Prioritizes.
It gives you a level of, absolutely. And it gives you confidence. It helped me tremendously to know that I can putt extremely well,
right,
on a day-to-day basis based on actual, objective stats. So, but to get your distances, it's very important to know how far you hit your clubs. And until you have some idea of that, it's pretty tough, and you feel like you're guessing a lot. So when I grew up, we had, I think back then, had laser rangefinders, just kind of coming along back then. But I would go to a big park in Chicago, and, at the beginning of the summer, would pace off 100 yards, 150 yards, and stick old shafts in the ground, and then hit 10 balls with a sand wedge or, pitching wedge.
Right.
And basically just average out all of the numbers so that I would have a pretty good idea of how far I was carrying the golf ball. Now you don't really have to do that if you don't want to, but it's not a bad exercise to go through. You can, there's flight scope. I teach with a flight scope, and I do that a lot with a lot of my students. We just spend an hour going through their bag, using a rangefinder, or the flight scope, which is a radar,
right,
to get their yardages.
Yeah, and I was like you, old school. I had to pace out where I grew up. Of course, we had a park connected to our school, our public school. And sometimes on a weekend when there wasn't different sporting events, whether it be soccer or whatever, we had several soccer fields as well as baseball diamonds. And my friends and I would go out there, and that's what we would do sometimes, and pace off, like you said, 100 or 150 yards. We didn't have the technology that they have now to be able to help you do that. So we're talking about game planning here, of course. That's extremely important. You want them. Touch a little bit about that in our last segment here.
I think it's, game planning is really about how you decide what to do on the golf course. And it's a pretty important skill. We need to know how to hit the golf ball, and how to pick the club and how to aim at what target on the course is extremely important, and can save you a lot of strokes. So just an example was, I kind of advise most of my better players to not hit a shot at a flag that's kind of to the side of a green or all the way back, unless they have a sand wedge or a gap wedge in their hand, because the margin for error, once you get into a longer less lofted golf club, it gets to be pretty big. And so you're actually better off aiming toward the middle of the green, and hopefully, you might miss it toward the flag. It's a pretty common thing. And then you end up with a ball that's on the green, and it's a lot easier to make a putt or to get a ball down in two if you're putting than if you're chipping. So things like that, how to choose targets when you're on tees also. And sorry.
And I think I think also too, Paul, as you touch on here in some of your comments, I think it's important for golfers to be realistic in their expectations as well, or certainly reasonable in their expectations. I think a lot of people get out there and, they can hit a decent ball, and sometimes they maybe get a little bit too aggressive. So when you're planning for your round, and you should, I think even the amateurs, they think, well, I'm not playing in a U.S. Open, or I'm not playing at the Masters or a tournament. Why do I need to plan? But and I don't mean that you have to spend 2 or 3 hours, but you certainly need to, especially if you're playing, at a course with some sort of frequency, and you have a familiarity of that course. I think it is a good idea to plan. You have an understanding of the greens and some of the greens that are more receptive than others, and maybe where some of your hazards are a little bit more. So it makes perfect sense, I think, to pre-round to maybe do a little planning. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So what I was talking about just before this was kind of how to know what your shot zones are and how to pick targets. But most players who play tournament golf go into tournament rounds knowing what clubs they're going to hit off of certain tees, because we kind of know that once you're in a tournament situation, you're better off not changing your strategy based on how you're feeling or what's just happened, or maybe you just made a bogey. So sticking with a strategy because you believe it's going to give you the best chance to make a score, the best score that you can, it's going to be the best thing in the long run for you. So when I play tournaments, I have yardage books and write down what club I want to hit and the shot that I want to play and what the target should be, based on where I think the tee is going to be. And doesn't really take a lot of time to do that, like you said, but it gives you the security of knowing that this is what is a successful strategy for you on that hole. So it's, especially if you're playing in like a club event, knowing what your plan is before you go out and play in that tournament is a very important thing.
And also the shot by shot opportunity as well gives you basically affirmation of the success rate that you had during that round as well, because as you record that information and you're sort of formulating a game plan, if you will, going into that round, the shot by shot program will actually, as I said, affirm what took place out in the golf course, and will help you to say, okay, yeah, my game plan, I successfully, did 70% of what I wanted to do with success. So it gives you some instant feedback, if you will, after your round, to be able to know that you're making some good decisions. Correct?
Definitely, and it also gives you a basis for making those decisions. If you have 40 rounds in shot by shot for the last year, some of them are tournament rounds, some of them are non-competition rounds. You can actually filter the rounds and separate them and see how you perform in tournaments and how you perform in non-tournament situations. And you can look and see what your rates of success are with certain clubs.
Sure.
And then actually build your strategy based on what you actually do well instead of what you think you do well. It's a good example for me is, it's just strange, but I am actually more accurate from 100 and I think it's 65 to 180 yards than I am from 75 yards.
Right.
And it's just because that's a partial wedge, and I'm a decent ball striker. So I think it's helpful for me to know that I'm pretty good from 180 yards, and that a 6-iron is a comfortable club for me. And then I shouldn't really be worried about having to hit that club if I have to lay up or something along those lines. So the shot-by-shot program definitely helps with all of that.
Yeah, and you're right. It's 75-yard is difficult for a lot of people, and you want to be able to have that information. Stats are important to keep because it gives you it helps with your confidence level because it gives you again feedback and an understanding of where your strengths and weaknesses are, and it tells you the areas that you need to work on, but it gives you confidence in areas, like you said, whether it be putting or ball striking or what have you. It gives you that, good feedback and good information to be able to make some sound decisions with confidence and say, I know I can do this, and know that when you get over the ball in that particular scenario or situation, given those shots that you are more comfortable with, it just helps to further your confidence. I want to ask you one final question because we got to wrap up here. But going into the U.S. Open, of course, you've had some conversation, I'm sure, with some of the members there. Those that you're working with, did you give them any tips or anything as they're watching the U.S. Open? Obviously, you want them to have fun and enjoy the tournament. But as I asked the guys in the panel earlier, did you give them any sort of thoughts to think about what they should try to take away from watching the event other than just, the enjoyment that they maybe could learn or incorporate into their own game?
It's a lot to do with the game planning aspects of, what we were just talking about. I think, good example, what we just talked about, the 75-yard shot.
Sure.
The average tour player actually misses a quarter of their greens from 75 yards. So playing to positions where you're going to be successful, keeping the ball in play and out of that rough that looks just impossible, right? Some of the clips that we're seeing from the rough this week are the shots that we're seeing people hit are pretty amazing. So making sure that the ball is in play and that the next shot you hit, you can get a golf club on the ball and not have to punch out sideways or very similar to a lot of the advice I give a lot of my students. You have to choose your opportunities to take risks. You have to know who you are and play the way you're playing and choose shots that are compatible with that and get the ball on the green. These players are not going to, they're not going to be aiming at a lot of these flags. They can't because the greens are so fast.
Right.
And, they're all excellent putters. So kind of a lot of the same, general ideas. Greens and regulation are king. Making sure that you're in a good position to try to make your par. I think the last time the Open was held at Oakmont, the winning score was, 5 over, something like that? So
I think so. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And it's all about positioning. It's really getting yourself in that position to execute your next shot, and that's really what it's all about. And you're right. Paul, I want to thank you for coming back on again. I know you're going to be stepping up for some future Coaches Corners as well, and I look forward to having you come back on. But I really appreciated that, and I enjoyed having you on this evening. And I always try to give all of the members out there, whether they be coaches or teacher professionals or entrepreneurs in the golf industry, give them an opportunity to come on and share with my audience some of their expertise. And it's not just to help the average golfers out there and even the advanced golfers, but it's really to help one another within the industry because, as I said earlier on the show with the other guys, it's really about sharing information amongst one another. So I always try to do that. I think it's a great format to do that. Can't always get that information out on social media, so I try to do that. So, Paul, thank you very much again for coming on Golf Talk Live tonight and being my special guest, and enjoy the U.S. Open this weekend.
Thanks so much, Ted. I appreciate you having me. Looking forward to being back with you for Coach's Corner, and I think it's like a month.
Yeah, I think so. So have a good one, and thank you again for coming on Golf Talk Live.
Okay, thanks so much. Have a good night.
You're welcome. You too. Bye-bye. Okay, that was my very special guest. Paul Kaster is the golf coach and director of instruction at Forsgate Country Club, and just a great gentleman wealth of knowledge, and I appreciate him coming on the show tonight. And as we just wrapped up here, he'll be joining us in about a month's time back on Coach's Corner and offering some input as well. So on behalf of me, myself, and I, have a great weekend, everybody. Enjoy the U.S. Open. Thank you to all of you listeners for tuning in faithfully to Golf Talk Live each and every week. And thank you to all the sponsors and supporters of the program as well. God bless everybody, and I will see you next Thursday right here at 6 p.m. Central on Golf Talk Live. Thanks, everybody.